A science fiction writer called it a shamelessly exploitative little toy. 1982. He was reviewing a video game that had just helped generate $74 million in 6 months. The company behind it wasn't Atari. It wasn't Activision. It was a 100-year-old board game company that had never made a video game in its life until 18 months earlier. Another empire, another case. Here's what really happened. Parker Brothers had been selling games since 1883, when a 16-year-old named George Parker self-published a card game called Banking. By 1982, the company had survived nearly a century, produced Monopoly, and quietly proven it understood electronic play too. In 1978, handheld game Merlin sold 700,000 units before its first Christmas alone, and would go on to sell millions more over the next several years. Which means Parker Brothers wasn't some outsider chasing a trend. It already knew electronic games could be enormous. Then, in early 1981, Atari came knocking. An executive from Atari's home computer division approached Parker Brothers about licensing its board games for cartridge versions. Parker looked at that request and reached a different conclusion entirely. If Atari wanted Parker's brands on cartridges that badly, Parker should be making the cartridges itself. The company spent $50,000 reverse engineering Atari's own hardware. Parker Brothers' parent, General Mills, also owned Kenner, and Kenner already held the toy rights to Star Wars. That corporate relationship became Parker's opening. While Atari was still negotiating for arcade rights, Parker Brothers quietly locked up Star Wars for the home. A company that had spent 99 years selling cardboard and dice was about to become one of the biggest cartridge publishers in America. It took them about a year. Parker Brothers didn't try to adapt the entire Empire Strikes Back into a cartridge. They picked one moment: Luke Skywalker's snowspeeder against the AT-AT walkers on Hoth, and built the whole game around it. Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back became the first officially licensed Star Wars video game in history. Alongside it, Parker released a home version of Sega's arcade hit Frogger. Parker's own promotional materials called it Superstar, and claimed the cartridge alone passed 3 million units sold in under a year. Between June and December of 1982, Parker Brothers' cartridge division brought in $74 million from a company that 6 months earlier had never published a single video game. But not every review was a celebration. Science fiction author Harlan Ellison reviewed the Star Wars cartridge for Video Review and tore it apart, calling it exploitative and pointing out the obvious flaw hiding under all that revenue. The game had no ending. You could only delay losing. Parker Brothers had just proven a board game company could out-earn video game companies at their own business. What they hadn't proven was that they picked a business built to last. Parker's strategy was never just Atari. The plan from the start was Atari first, then Intellivision, then home computers. A cross-platform approach that gave Parker an advantage hardware makers like Atari and Mattel didn't have. Parker wasn't tied to one system. It could sell to everyone. That was the whole point. It was also, unintentionally, the exposure. Because being everywhere in the cartridge market in 1983 meant being everywhere when the cartridge market collapsed. Parker kept releasing titles through 1983 and into 1984. Q*bert, Popeye, Gyrus, Star Wars: Return of the Jedi. This wasn't a company that panicked and fled overnight. It was a company that had bet heavily on a market that was disappearing underneath it in real time, and kept shipping anyway. The same third-party gold rush that built Activision and broke iMagic had pulled in a board game company that had survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and 99 years of changing tastes, and the crash didn't care about any of that history. Parker Brothers didn't get the timing wrong on video games. They got the timing wrong on an entire industry, at the exact moment they'd finally proven they belonged in it. Parker Brothers' cartridge ambitions faded through 1984. Not a single dramatic exit, but a slow wind down, as the market it had joined simply stopped existing. The board game business, the one that had built the company for a century, never stopped. In 1985, Parker Brothers' parent company restructured its toy and game holdings into a new entity called Kenneth Parker Toys. In 1987, Tonka bought that company outright. In 1991, Hasbro bought Tonka. Parker Brothers survived every one of those changes as a name and a brand, just never again as a video game publisher. The board games outlived the cartridges by decades. Parker Brothers wasn't the only company that piled into cartridges during the same boom. Believing Activision had proven the model forever, Coleco, iMagic, and a wave of others made the identical bet at the identical moment. What happened to the entire American video game industry in 1983, the crash that ended all of their cartridge ambitions at once, is bigger than any one of these companies, and it's the next chapter. You now know how a 100-year-old board game pushed out earned dedicated video game publishers within months of entering their business, and how that same speed made the fall just as fast. What you don't know yet is what actually happened across the entire industry in 1983. The collapse that Parker, iMagic, and dozens of others walked straight into, believing the good times had no ceiling. That's the next case file. Another empire, another case. Here's what really happened.